Okay, this is my Honda VTX 1800 and it's a 2005 model. I absolutely love this bike and I really enjoy getting out on it. And I love to be able to tinker on it. It's one of the things about it that I do like. But what I've found is that every time you want to do something, inevitably, you have to either take the fuel tank off or you have to be able to prop it up to be able to get to the bits and pieces that lie underneath the tank. Just to get to those bits and pieces is very awkward unless you have that tank at least partially off. And the problem that you have with the VTX is that the fuel line that they have here has no stop valve, and so to move the tank at all, you've actually got to disconnect the rubber fuel line that goes through there, and as a result fuel goes everywhere, and it's a very messy operation to be able to do. I'm worried one day something might go wrong on the road and I'll be stuck on the side of the road without a bucket to collect the fuel, and it's just going to be a real mess. There's some small workarounds you can have, but they're very messy. So today what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and install a quick release valve into that fuel line, so that if I do ever want to work on the bike, it's simply a matter of clicking a button, disconnecting the fuel line, and then pulling the bike to pieces in a much less messy fashion. It should make it a lot more enjoyable for me to be able to work on the bike. So let's see how we go. Okay, so the bits I bought to make this possible is this little number here, which is a quick disconnect inline fuel connector. So once you press this button here, it pops straight off with quite a bit of force actually, and it should just pop straight back in and push down and connect. If I wasn't to hold the end of it, it would shoot all the way off. So it's a good quality piece. It cost you probably about 40 bucks on Amazon. I'll put the link in the video. And I also bought a new section of fuel hose, and this is 5/16 high quality fuel hose. Now it is a different size to the one that the VTX uses, and so this will be interesting to see how this works. I want to make sure that it does. It's very elastic, it does stretch quite a bit, so I don't think there's a problem with me getting it over the nozzles that are there. I've just put I've taken the top off a nut, or a bolt I should say, and screwed it partially into the end. I'm going to use that setup to connect to the existing hose and be able to pull this through. It should make my life a little bit easier as we try and replace the hose. So there's a couple of things we need to do right now. I guess first thing is to try and get the bike into a position where it's a lot easier to work on, and what I use for that is I have a trolley jack here that has a nice low profile. We'll be able to slip that underneath the bike, lift it up. It's a fairly stable environment to be able to work on the bike and make sure that it's upright while I'm working on it. The next thing I will do is remove the seat so that we have access to the other bits and pieces from there, and you need to remove the seat to be able to get to the tank. Just underneath the seat there is where the Allen key is required to be able to remove the seat. You have one on each side of the seat, and then you'll have a 10mm bolt that is on the back here as well that needs to come off before you can remove the seat. With those 3 anchor bolts removed, it's a fairly easy thing now to be able to just lift the back of the seat up and it comes straight off. For us to keep working on this, we're going to have to disconnect this sucker here, and when we do that, we're going to have a real mess. It always pays to have a towel with you because you're going to be soaking up a lot of fuel. A lot of people will drain the entire tank and put a hose on that and drain it out. I'm a bit lazy and I don't like to waste fuel. I've just filled the tank as well. So what is going to happen is as soon as I take this off, I'm going to have fuel going everywhere. And so I've made up this little gadget here, which at the moment you can see it actually just has a bolt in the end of it. But I'll take that bolt out. I'm going to pop that hose immediately on there, which acts as a stop so that the fuel can't continue to come out, and then I'll place that bolt back down the end of our fuel line so that I don't have as much fuel going everywhere. Once that happens, I'm then going to need to drain whatever fuel is left in the fuel line, because that's the bit that I want to replace. And if I can do that without having to take the tank off, it'll just save me maybe 20 minutes of mucking around. So I'm hoping that I don't have to take the whole thing off. If I am going to take the whole thing off, I have to take this bolt here out. I then have to disconnect the other lines that are under there and some electrical things. It's not that hard to do. You get to know which ones you can disconnect, and it's not that difficult to be able to work around that. But for me, if we can get away with it without having to remove that, it just makes our life a whole heap easier. So let's see how that works. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to try and get this thing disconnected with as least amount of fuel going everywhere as possible. One of the difficulties I have is I'm always working on this bike alone, and what I've seen online is people needing an assistant to be able to do this particular job. So for me, I've had to figure out how do I do it on my own, and certainly when you're on the road, if you're going for a ride on your own, you won't have the benefit of having an extra person with you. So here goes. First thing is, for me, I've got this little clamp here, so I need to just move that down out of the way so I can start to work on prizing this off. Okay, so now that's out of the way, I've actually got to be really quick to be able to do this. So okay, I'm at the point where I want to remove this fuel line. As I've said, I'm going to end up with a big mess if I'm not careful. So what I've learnt to do in the past is I've made up these two pieces here, just a bit of tubing that's got a zip tie around it just to close it off. I'm going to ram that over the outlet on the fuel tank. That should stop any fuel from the tank coming out. I just don't want to have to go to the trouble of draining the whole tank to do this operation, wasting the fuel, just the extra work that's involved also in pulling the tank completely off. And for the remaining line here, there's a small clamp that I've got that I've already loosened and moved down. I'm going to pop this down the end of it for the time being, but I'm going to need to drain anything that's left in that line to be able to complete this operation. So this becomes messy. Everyone else I've seen do this online has two people doing it. I've had to learn to do it on my own. It does become messy, but I don't think it's any less messy than what I've seen people do with two people. So having a towel is important, absorbent towel, just around any bits to catch all the drips that are going to happen as things start flowing. And then we need to get this to a point where it's nearly off. I use a pair of pliers, bent nose pliers, just to gently grip that and to help just wiggle and move that fuel line just down so it's ready to come off. Fuel's starting to seep out now. So I need to be ready to go now, and first thing is to cap off the flow of fuel. So I'm going to pop my thumb over the end of the outlet from the tank while I'm attempting to put this into this fuel line. Not so easy. First step, and we are disconnected and fuel is going everywhere. Okay, so I've stemmed the flow right now. As you can see, there's fuel going everywhere. I've now got it capped off with one hand. I have one finger over the hose, one finger over the outlet. Now I'm going to put this bolt down the end of this hose to try and stop that. And that'll free up my other hand. Okay, the bolt's now in. And just a little bit of fuel leaking out of there. Okay, so I still have this problem up here, but it's not that hard to solve that one. There we go, over it now. Just a matter of forcing that over the end. Okay. So, You can see that I've at least stopped now the fuel flowing out of the tank and made that a one-man operation. And although it does look messy, that's actually a lot less than a lot less fuel that I've seen come out when others have done it. Now that I've got this stopped from the fuel tank and the fuel line, I'm going to have to take the tank off, which is going to involve me removing this particular bolt that needs to be completely pulled out. That enables this to be lifted up, but not just yet. If you lift that up and you're not ready, this case around your instrument panel there will hit, and that's going to cause some problems. So we've actually got to remove this before we lift the tank up. So let's start with this one, and this is just a 10mm socket, very easy to be able to remove. And you'll see on the other side there's also a socket. So one-handed, a little bit difficult. I'll put the camera down and be back to you once I got that. Okay, so I've taken the nut off the other end, then there's just this one, pulls straight out. If you have any resistance, lifting the tank up a little bit, just taking the pressure off is enough to remove that bolt. So next up we need to get to the cover that we have here. Now these will take a 5mm Allen key. So we just need to worry about the 3 of them. Again, I just loosen them up. By the way, you do need to take the fuel cap off to remove this cowling. But if you take it off first, before you undo these screws, there is a chance that you're going to drop them down your fuel tank. You do not want to do that. So just a little tip, just make sure that you are taking these out first, like this. Doesn't take much. Once you've taken the pressure off them, they're very well engineered, they're very easy to get out. There's no other tension that's on them. And then remove the cap. We're going to put that back on in a sec because we also don't want things to fall down there. And this whole section should just lift straight up. Be careful with it because you want to position it a little bit of jiggling to get it off its anchor point. Turn the handlebars. Should have done that before to give me the space that I need to remove that and to take it out. Now, I've done that the wrong way. All the wiring harness for that particular part of the bike is actually on the right hand side. So you've seen me do it wrong, but learn from my mistake. Lift it off and it will just sit and dangle down there quite comfortably. There'll be no problems with it there. It's not hitting anything. It's a plastic part, so it shouldn't cause any damage to anything. But if you're concerned about it, you can, I guess, wrap it in some things. But it just sits off to the side like that while we work on the rest of the bike. So now we just need to put back that fuel cap and we'll pop it back in. And that makes life a whole lot easier for us. Now nothing will drop into there unnecessarily. That's securely on there. Now I've popped the tank up at an angle like this. Now before you can remove the tank, if you are going to remove the tank, there's still a lot of things that are connected here. I found that by having a length of wood like this, I can just prop that part up and have it held up. It really is quite painful to be trying to hold it up any other way. You just need to measure that. I think it's about 9 inches that we've got there. Underneath here we've got a number of tubes and things that need to be disconnected. I've already disconnected this one for mine. I had a joiner hose there, so I was able to disconnect that. You may have to disconnect at this point. We need to disconnect here and here, and then reconnect all that when we put things back together. Now, in addition to that, there is some electrical stuff on the other side. As you start taking pieces off, it becomes a little bit easier to just raise it a little bit more and to pull the pieces off. So I'm going to disconnect these ones here now. Okay, so now I've disconnected those. You can see they're all disconnected at this point. Something interesting of note, you can see the radiator cap is actually here. So if you ever have a situation where you need to refill your radiator, or anyone has to work on your radiator, there's quite a bit of work to get to this particular part. You do have an overflow tank underneath the bike, but to top it up completely, you're going to need to be able to get to this point here. So learning how to get your tank off is an important part of owning a VTX. Hence the reason why I want to be able to have a quick release here to make my life a little bit more easy to be able to work on things. Now, by disconnecting these other hoses here, I'm not a mechanic, I'm just someone who enjoys fiddling and working on bits and pieces. It has actually stopped the flow of fuel coming from here. So although there may be still a little bit of fuel in my fuel line there, it's now put me in a position without having to remove the entire tank, but by disconnecting those hoses that were there, it stops the flow of fuel from coming out.
Okay, so what we need to do from here is we need to remove this little case here so that we can get to what's behind here and where the fuel pump or the fuel line runs into. So there's a couple of spots we need to get to. One is down in here. Okay. Similarly, on the other side, there's another one, as you would probably expect there to be. And there's one at the top, up here. So I'm having trouble getting my camera in there. So that's my next step, is just to remove that case. Now, just so you can see where it is, if you go back in, it's behind the rear tyre, and there's that case here is what we're trying to remove. If you can get your head down into there, you'll be able to see the spots that need to come off. There's 3 of them. Okay, well, I've got those plates off now, and the difficulty was it does move around a little bit, but I had to get to the hose here. You can probably just see that there. That hose is the one that we're going to be replacing, and where it connects is very awkward and difficult to get at, so you'll just have to take a bit of fiddling around to be able to do that. And I'm now going to connect the replacement hose to that hose with that threaded bolt that I had already inserted in the end of my new hose. And once I've connected that, hopefully it'll put us in a position where I can just gently tug that through and pull it right through and replace that whole hose unit. Okay, well, that took a lot more effort than I was expecting it to. I had to remove the entire bracket. If you have a little bit of mechanical knowledge, I guess it wouldn't be too hard to locate the bolts. They were an 8mm screw that needed to be taken out, or bolt that needed to be taken out. There was 3 of those to remove that plate. That made it a little bit easier to work with the part that the hose goes onto. And it just took a lot of juggling to be able to get that on, but I finally got it on. And now I've connected the new hose, which you see lying around here, to the old hose with a bit of a bolt that we cut the head off, and joined the 2 together with that as a temporary measure, so that when we get to here, I've now got to try and pull this through with the new hose on it, and that's going to prove to be a little bit tricky, so I'll get myself set up to do that and I'll let you know how that goes. Okay, so I was able to get the line through following the same track the old line went on. As you can see, I've got quite a bit of extra as a result. I'll trim that in a moment. Just a word of caution as you're doing things, if you can spare to put a towel on top of your tank. I managed to put a nice little scratch in my tank just there from having my handlebars not quite straight when I was lifting the tank. So I just warn you guys, that's not a nice thing. I'm very annoyed with myself for having done that. So now I've got to work out how long this hose has got to be for me to be able to cut it at the right place. So I'm going to lower it down and put the tank down, and then we'll have another look. Okay, so I've dropped the tank back pretty much to the position it's going to be sitting in once everything's reassembled. Now I'm going to try and work out how this is going to go. Obviously it's better if we cut it a little bit long than a little bit short, so we might try to I'll probably cut it around about there, and then I'll make a secondary cut which will happen in line here to be able to put the actual inline valve on. So let's see how that goes. Okay, took the step and I've cut the hose. So now I'm going to decide where I'm going to have my join, and I'll need to just compare and look at where the best spot is going to be. Okay, I did move the ignition. I took this bolt here out and just swung it out of the way while I was juggling the line through. But what I discovered is that the line actually came up and over and through here, was trying to be hidden, I guess, and I've just moved it to be below, because when I look at that is a more natural line for it to go along, and will make it a lot easier for me to be able to get to that quick disconnect if it's at that angle than the angle it was on before. So I think that's the way that I'm going to look at this. So I'm going to cut it again at about here, and that should be my correct length now. And I'll still have to do a little bit of trimming to make sure I get the length right for the actual connector, which will take up a section of that hose as well. I want to make sure it looks okay. I did get a stainless steel one so that it would fit in okay with the chrome that was on my bike. Okay, well that actually didn't take too much fiddling with. I'm sorry I had to put the camera down to do that, but I just pretty much, first of all I measured this one and I cut the piece, inserted the top. As you can see, it's now quick release. That enabled me to switch over from the plastic bit that I was using that was stuck on here stopping the fuel coming out, to immediately change it over to this one. Now as you can see, no fuel's running out because it has a valve in there which only opens up when this is closed, and there's no backflow coming back from this one because it also has that. A lot of the ones I saw online were plastic, and they had just a one-way valve, which meant as soon as I disconnected I would be having fuel flowing out from one or the other, and I wanted something that looked strong, going for the stainless. This has got some quite good barbs that are on there as well. I've opted not to include the clamps because they, as you can see, they also protrude. I'm worried they're going to rub too much in here. Now I'm hoping that's going to do the job. It's a slightly smaller line than what was in there, but I guess the proof will be if it runs firstly, and then when I take it out and take it for a spin, whether it's going to get enough juice to do what it's meant to do. So that's the operation that I'm up to at this point. It's now really just putting everything back the way that I took it off, and then we've finished the job.